Thanks for joining. My name is Christine Perfetti, and I am the founder of Lift Up Connections. And for those of you who have attended our conversation so far, the goal out of these conversations is to talk with powerhouse women about navigating career and life and hear about their stories and lessons learned. A brief introduction: Carrie Driscoll is the president and founder of Reef Consulting. She has over 2 decades of experience in agile coaching, project management, and change management. And in her current role with her business, Carrie leads a team of agile experts who provide executive coaching, strategic guidance, and offers digital transformation services to many clients, including Fortune 100. Carrie, I've been thinking back how long we've known each other, and it's been close to 15 years, which is
Oh, wow.
unbelievable to me. And I remember that it's been 15 years. We met when we were both working at Carbonite.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I try to think about how to describe Carbonite. It was at the time a B2C powerhouse. Now I'd say it's a B2B powerhouse as it was acquired. But why I was so excited to have you come on today, while we were working together, you were in the midst of transforming the organization through an agile transformation and digital
That's right.
transformation. And you were also one of the powerhouse leaders within the organization that I turned to for recommendations and advice. So I was thrilled. We've now come full circle. It's 15 years later. I'm thrilled to have you on today. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. And I'm just going to take you everywhere I go because that was a fantastic introduction. I'm like, oh, I need to remember this.
I know a bit about your career history and trajectory. For the attendees and for me, can you share a little bit about the story of your career and life and how you arrived here?
Sure. I would love to say that I planned it all out and it was purposeful, but it was not. It was a series of opportunities that in some cases I took and lucked out in some ways in its trajectory of where I ended up today. In the beginning, I was in technology and women in technology. There weren't a lot of us. And so even in college, I got a scholarship for being the only woman in computer science, that kind of thing happened. And so very early on, it made an impression on me, although I didn't know how much it would affect my livelihood as I move forward in my career. And the things I learned along the way have been amazing. So I started out in tech. I was in quality assurance. When I actually started working at Carbonite, it was to set up their quality assurance department or group. I was employee number 5. So employee number 5, you're wearing a whole bunch of different hats. You're just helping in whatever way you can with your experience and with your expertise to help start a new organization. That was great and a lot of learning. And then during the course of that time, our friend Rob Rubin, who I'm still very close with, he instigated that we talk about going agile. And we went out and learned agile. And then it was like, okay, go make everyone agile. Which is a lot harder than just going to a 2-day class and coming back and being like, oh, I know how to be a scrum master, but you really don't.
Mhm.
So it was all of those learnings of that, like trying to push that rock up the hill and things falling back and into old habits and then continuing against that wave of resistance, really, because you have an organization that was purpose built for one thing and you're trying to change it, and really learning how to extend your level of influence by modeling, by leading from a servant leader perspective as an expert in a particular field. And that was difficult for me in many ways, but mainly if we get into imposter syndrome, it was mainly that inner doubt, like, why are people even listening to me? What do I have that they should listen to me about? Or if it was about agile, I felt very confident. And I can talk to you about that in a minute. But if it was about anything else, like my position in the organization or my experience in QA, I didn't have as much confidence in my abilities based on the fact that there were all these other people that were in that same field as I was. And so I was like, okay, so I'm probably the one who's wrong here. The
Interesting.
majority of the time, that was not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I also was taking note. I've been running these interviews and conversations with many accomplished women like you. And when I ask about the career trajectory, one thing that's come up consistently in all of my conversations, and I say this as well, and I heard it from you, is that when you think about your career trajectory, you often you might describe it as you had luck along the way. And what's really interesting, you brought up a lot of times we're surrounded by men and powerful men and leaders. When I've been interviewing the men, they have talked less about luck, whereas the women all have mentioned the luck and help and support they've gotten along the way. Do you have any thoughts and perspectives why that is?
It's a curiosity for sure. And the only thing I can think of is if you go all the way back to the hunters and the gatherers, and like those are the things innately that we were meant to do and be. And if men were the hunters, there was no dictating, like you were going to live or die by that hunter. If they didn't go out and get you food or protect themselves, you didn't live.
Yep.
So I think that they are, in general, and this is total all generalizations, obviously, much more confident in their ability to just go out and find work,
Mm-hmm.
and confident about the work that they can do and have done. And the way that they speak is different. I often hear myself still saying things like, I'm sorry, I just want to say one more thing. Like, why am I apologizing?
Mm.
Or why am I even saying just one more thing? Like, I need to continuously remind myself to be brave and to say what I need to say with confidence because it's needed, right? Like I'm certainly not just talking to speak.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a difference that I see just
Yeah.
when you're observing, when you're in a meeting, and the women that are in the meeting and the men that are in the meeting, and the difference in how they speak, especially when they're trying to get the attention of the whole group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. So I think it might go back to that. But to your point, I don't really know why we think it's luck. We certainly did all the things necessary to get to the place where we are, right? And I think we
Absolutely.
probably, at least in my case, did more than necessary because I had to, the biggest competitor for myself is myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the most doubt I get is from myself. I certainly have had plenty of leaders in my life that were like, absolutely not. You've got this. You've got
Mm-hmm.
this. And a couple of them were at Carbonite.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke to already a bit, Carrie, about this notion of imposter syndrome. And again, it's a pattern that tends to come up more, I'd say, for women than men, I'd say. I'm wondering, how do you think about imposter syndrome? We talk about it a lot, but what does it mean to you? Like, how do you think about it and how do you define it?
Yeah. So to me, it's that idea that we don't give ourselves the credit for where we are, that we think that we're faking it or something. We have a position. So if you're thinking about it from a work perspective, we have a position that we think, I don't know how I got here. I don't know if I can do this role. And so you feel like that imposter. I'm pretending that I can do this job, but you're getting it done on a daily basis and you're doing it well. So it is, that's how I feel. That's what I think it is. What about you? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been thinking a lot about this. When I hear people talking, you hit on both elements that I think about with imposter syndrome. When I hear people talking about it, a lot of times, like you said, they talk about the first element of not feeling worthy or not feeling good enough. You hit on something that I don't hear as much of a discussion about, which is that feeling of not feeling worthy, that it doesn't match up with reality and what people are accomplishing and doing. There's this misalignment. So yeah, that definitely resonates what you said, Carrie. It's another thing that comes up with imposter syndrome is that we as women, if we're feeling that, may manifest that imposter syndrome with different behaviors. We don't all behave in the same way when we feel imposter syndrome. I'm curious, I can tell you a little bit about how I think I do, but when you're feeling that at certain points in your career, can you tell by your behaviors? Are there certain things you do when that feeling of imposter syndrome comes up, or can you detect it in others?
Absolutely, especially detecting it myself. It shows up as being shy or timid about something, which I'm not usually that way, right? And if it's a topic that I'm not comfortable with, then of course, yes, I'll just say that. But the whole, like, I think about when I was younger and people said, "Oh, you were so shy," and I was like, I don't think I was shy. I just think I was not 100% confident in my ability to carry a conversation in whatever we were talking about. As far as seeing it in others, so most of the time you're sitting at a table with people that you know their background And so I find that when I'm seeing that in others, I like to reach out during the course of the meeting to say, Christine, remember that time that you did that presentation on UX in front of
Mhm.
the 600 million people at
Yeah.
that conference, and that those particular questions that were challenging and you answered it? Like, I want to promote where you stood tall and confident and delivered something that very few people could do, so that it could boost your confidence during the course of a meeting. And I like to try to remind myself to do that.
You've done a lot of work, and as you've advanced in your career, you mentioned the times that you feel those moments of imposter syndrome. A lot of us feel that still today. And I'm wondering, when those moments come up for people, do you have recommendations and lessons learned for how to continue on or how to overcome those feelings? And if so, what are those recommendations for people? The feelings don't
Yeah,
always go away.
they don't. So you're always reminding yourself. But some of the recommendations that I have for others and that I've tried myself and used myself as a practice is to have the right information. So first off, know your value. I'm talking work wise, right? So know your
Hmm.
value, be an expert in your field, but you don't have to go over and above. So you're working with other peers, understand where your other peers are, and know that's at least the level that you want to be at. For me, it's at least the level I want to be at, is that level of expert also in my particular career. And then know your value and know your worth. So know what the market is for your particular role and responsibilities. Because when I did that at one place, I found out that my colleague, who had the exact same job, but only 25% of the region revenue, and I had 75 in the exact same job and more people reporting into me and more responsibility, I found out that I was significantly getting paid significantly less than he was.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
reason that happened is because I was talking to him about what was out in the market and what's expected. We hired people all the time. And he said it. He said, I have a fear that you're not getting paid what you're worth. And this is what I'm getting. So he's not really supposed to say that, but he did, because he
Yeah.
kind of had it. He knew that it was happening. And he said, you need to fix that because you're doing more, you're leading this. I follow you and you have more responsibility, more revenue, more this, more that. So that was great. Then I went and had a conversation with my husband. Same thing. He's, you always wait for people to say, oh, you did all these wonderful things. I'm going to give you a raise.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't do that. I go and I say to my boss, oh, I did all these wonderful things. I need, not even give me a raise. I need this number to
Yeah.
continue. And that's just was so foreign to me. So I was very lucky that I had folks like that to guide me and help me along. But when I went to my boss and I said, here's what I should be at, and here's why, and I know that so and so is already making significantly more than I am and has the same job. And he was like, he has more experience. I said, he might have more experience in one way or another, but I'm doing that same job plus
Yeah.
more people and more. And he was like, huh, like it didn't even occur to him
Mhm.
that if you're doing the exact same responsibility and you're actually doing more in experience and skills, growing of them because you have more people or you're doing more 75% of the country, it was foreign concept to him. So luckily he agreed and he said, you know what, I'm going to go see, what do you want, I was like,
Wow.
oh.
Yeah.
So he did, he went and he had that conversation with the CEO, and I think they had a little argument, but it came back that I was able to get a bump.
That's amazing.
I know, but I never would have done that if I hadn't done the research. And you have to have confidence in the knowledge of, I know what I should be at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about pay equity in the workplace, you did the research, you knew your worth, you came to the conversation strong in that confidence and very clear reasons why this is your worth. Another part of your story that was really interesting to me when you were talking about some of the people you spoke to, including your husband, to lift you up and support you in your confidence here. When I first started increasing my rate as a consultant, it came down to I had a lot of fear, and I also had a best friend who happens to be a man say, look, this is what you deserve and this is your worth. Go in there and ask for it. And I did, and I got it. Yet
Right.
this before I had the conversations, it was less about the conversation with my client and more about me managing my fear going into the conversation. I'm curious for you, you know your worth, you know your competence. There is still some underlying emotions there, correct?
Absolutely, especially
Yeah.
now owning your own business and having people that work with you and for you and having that responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do I know what I'm doing? Am I going to get us into a position where I can't pay people? Like that
Mm-hmm.
absolutely causes doubt and fear.
Yeah.
But I do know my worth and I do know what others are making. And I know that has come down a little bit lately. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand that as well. So you got to stay realistic.
Absolutely.
And but be confident. Absolutely. And you know what? The worst that can happen is they say no. And hopefully you have a
Absolutely.
relationship with them that it's a conversation and a negotiation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus
Mm-hmm.
just no and see you
Mm-hmm.
later.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also seen a pattern where for some people, and you're right, it's not always women or men, but in some instances, when we talk about imposter syndrome and we talk about the feeling of not being ready or not having the worth, there's sometimes with some positions where there might be an element that you're not quite ready, but in order to eventually get there, there's a mindset in play that feeling like you will get there. I'm curious if you've seen that. I describe it as making sure you still have a growth mindset.
I think for the most part, the mindset that I see in women or men that I'm
Yeah.
coaching or talking with is a growth mindset, right? I mean,
Hmm.
in technology, you know that if you're not continuing to learn, you're going to get behind very
Yeah.
quickly, right?
Yeah.
In the rate of change out there. So that growth mindset, that learning culture is very important to everyone who's in tech.
Mm.
So I don't bump into that aspect that often. I do bump into folks that are just going above and beyond all of the time and getting too upset, like getting too stressed out about things when they probably had it. If they're working on something for 3 weeks, they probably had it after 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
still stressing and worrying. And that part of imposter syndrome, the fear of I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, all the way up until you actually do it, that can be detrimental. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that one is definitely something you want to keep people want to keep an eye on is
Hmm.
be prepared, but then say, okay, I've got this, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. It really speaks to me. It really resonates what you're saying here. You spoke to, and I felt this in the past. I also was described as very shy and quiet as a kid. That can be how the behavior manifests if you're feeling low confidence or imposter syndrome. But you
Right.
spoke about something else just now that really resonates too, that it doesn't necessarily lead to with imposter syndrome being shy or always being quiet. As you mentioned, it can sometimes manifest as being an overachiever, keep going, trying to be a perfectionist in the work you're doing. And sometimes you just have to say, you know what? You've got this versus continuing to think you need to work, and overachieve.
And I find for that most of the time what I see, and it's in our industry,
Uh,
is wisdom based on experience, right? I can take you, Christine, and throw you into a situation where you think one thing is going to be discussed and then something completely different happens, and you're
mhm.
still able to handle it because
Yeah.
the amount of experience that you have.
Hmm.
So you can still talk to the topics that they're going to raise because it's going to be in and around your field of study and your field of expertise.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of people that get into that situation and freeze.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to think, okay, is this just a level of experience that they don't have yet? So that's why they're uncomfortable? Or do they have it and they're not sure because they didn't prep first?
Yep.
I think you
Yep.
have to rely on your experience. You have stories to tell. Everyone has stories to tell. That's your experience. You have areas where things failed that you can talk about why they failed.
Hmm.
And that's fantastic for someone else to know. So they don't have to go through those same failures.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Talking about your career path. I'm curious. I know it's had some twists and turns, and you shared a bit about your story. I'm curious. I talk with a lot of women who are at an inflection point, deciding what's next in their career, whether they want to continue on their current trajectory and advance, or maybe shift into a new path. And I'm curious, when you think back on your career path and trajectory, Have there been major inflection points where you've made a shift? And if so, why and how did you get through them?
Yeah, there have been a couple, probably more than a couple, but the latest ones were when I went from working for technology product companies to consulting. That
Hmm.
was a big shift. And that was really, I got recruited. And during that time that I was talking to the recruiters, I hadn't even thought of consulting.
Hmm.
So that was very interesting and scary. I went into something completely different, but it was all based on the things that I had already learned. So I was confident in that. Um, but that was one. And the reason was is that I was finding being in one organization and supporting one transformation at a time, it was so hard, right?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
hard when you're inside an organization to continuously try to change and to transform them into something that they're used to being. It can be really hard when you're a full-time employee. And when you're a consultant, suddenly, they're like, oh, the consultant said to do this, so we're going to do this. It's
Hmm.
such a weird mindset. It
Yeah.
really is. But it happens all the time. You can even take a consultant that then gets hired full time. And then as suddenly they're a full-time employee and people are like, why do I need to listen to you?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So
I've
that was
experienced that as
one
well.
shift.
Yes.
I am sure you have,
Mhm.
yes. So
Yeah.
that was one shift.
It's top of mind for me. And you spoke to this a bit already, Carrie, in terms of having influence within an organization and with the people within it. Last week, we had a conversation with June Bauer. She's former CMO at WebEx, and she was talking with people about the notion of owning your power and having influence within an organization from the perspective of women. It was a conversation about women. How do you own your power and influence? You've navigated many organizations. You've also come in as an expert consultant. Do you have advice starting with when you're an internal employee asked to do what you were asked to do in many different organizations, transforming the organization from a digital transformation? Do you have advice for what we can do to have more influence in an organization when there is a major undertaking like a digital transformation?
Yeah. If I had to go back and do it again at Carbonite when we were going through that, I would bring in external consultants. And we were very lucky, right? We had amazing people come in and give us like workshops and stuff, but
Yeah.
bring in external consultants um, to have the transformation roll out. That's what I would do now because again, that sphere of influence, you just don't always have it, especially if it's if you're a larger organization and you've been asked to do an agile transformation through your PMO. That's really hard to
Hmm.
do at that level of the organization. And you might have executive sponsorship, but they're not involved on a day-to-day, and that makes it's really difficult. So I would bring in external consultants to help. And I'm not saying that just because you and I are consultants, right? I'm saying that because it would have made the time that it took to get there a lot shorter. And we eventually got there, but also you have to have continuous focus on maturing and improving. And the reason being is that you could have one employee come in and it can wreck a whole bunch of the process and the culture that you put in place. And we
Hmm.
saw that a few times as well. You just have to bring in some support if you want to get it done fast and learn what not to do right away, and then continuously have focus on it and measure, right?
Hmm.
Measure the outcomes and if you're gaining the benefits associated with whatever transformation you're doing.
Yep. Thank you. That makes sense. I've been getting this question a lot from folks, given the market these days, considering making the leap from being in-house to starting their own consultancy. And you've gone through that process. Do you have any advice in terms of what to think about before making that leap?
So I did it without, what ended up happening for me is I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go start my own company. Like other things happened, right? People reached out and said, hey, are you available to do some coaching? Like other coaches and stuff that needed help in their organizations where they were. So I started to get opportunities and I realized, oh boy, I gotta do something here. But what I would say is what I'm seeing right now in the market in the conversations that I'm having with agile consultancies that are similar to my size or a little bit larger, they're like, the phones have stopped ringing, the emails have stopped coming in. in 10 years or in 15 years that I've been in business and 20 years that I've
Yeah.
been in business, this is the hardest. Like I actually have to sell again.
Mm-hmm.
And this is coming from people that have been in the business for a long time. I just would be very aware of that. And there's a lot of competition out there. And I think everyone's just looking for work. So
Yeah. Talk about moments in life, given where the market is challenging, the
research, yeah.
relationships aren't coming through with the same amount of work. Talk about a
Mhm.
moment where imposter syndrome might
Right.
bubble up for folks. I'm wondering, just a thought here, because it seems to me, and I'm curious your take, that something like imposter syndrome is much more likely to come up when the environment around you is triggering that. I'm curious, do you think there's something there?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like it's validating your imposter syndrome, your
Hmm.
doubts. Yes,
Hmm.
for sure.
Good
Um,
times. People do,
you
especially
know,
as consultants, even in the best of markets, there's ebbs and flows. Any suggestions?
again, do your research, right?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the market and you're seeing everyone is struggling, then okay, you can tell that little doubting voice to go away
Yeah.
because you're in the same boat as a whole lot of other people. And you're reaching out and having these conversations with a whole lot of other people. And most of the time you're doing it in the sense of, hey, Christine, what is that? Is there anything that I can do to help you during this time or any time? And you're doing the same, right? So
Yep.
we're connecting with our network and we're finding out if they're dealing with the same issues and we're learning from each other on how
Mhm.
can we can work through it together. I would absolutely do that. But if you reach out and you find out that they're not having the same issues, then self-reflect and find out what you can do to improve in that particular area.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other big piece of advice for people when they're in the throes of imposter syndrome that we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
We covered it a little bit, but I would say address the fear, right? So
Yeah.
fear is at the root of your imposter syndrome. So address it, understand what it's coming from, where it's stemming, and then tackle that from the perspective, right? So know your value and understand where the fear is coming from and deal with it. And
Yeah.
that's so much easier said than done.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
Like, oh, that
Uh,
sounds easy. No.
I'm curious, understanding where the fear comes from. How do you get to that point? Just more and more self-reflection to think about where that's coming from?
Yeah, and it might be conversations. Give me a call and be like, all right, Carrie, this is what I'm thinking. And or anyone that knows you and knows your expertise and knows
Mhm.
how great you are. And they're not just building you up to build you up. They're giving you real examples of why that's a fear that you don't need to worry about, you know.
Yeah. You're touching
And then you
upon
could talk through
something.
where it came from. It came from my
Absolutely.
abandonment issues or it came from whatever, you know.
You're touching upon something that's been a theme through our entire conversation that's really important. And it also, I think, is when people are feeling that fear, there could be a tendency to go it alone, like not talk about that fear, try to figure it out by themselves. And you've really been highlighting throughout our conversation the importance of relationships and your network and others lifting you up, you lifting them up. That's really my big takeaway that you've been sharing, that it is about getting out of your head and connecting. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our own head can just be so unhealthy sometimes for ourselves. So yes, get out of your own head
Yeah, tell me
because
about
you
it.
are usually your biggest enemy sometimes, for
Yep.
sure. Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Carrie, thank you so much for this conversation. It was super, super helpful, and it's always
you're
lovely to talk to
welcome.
you.
You as well. Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Carrie.
It was nice talking with you.
And
Thanks.
thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today.